Hello and welcome to episode number 119 of Week in Review. My name is Sean, and on this week's show, we're talking about two bright and cheerful games in StarCrossed and Arcade Spirits. We'll look forward to this week's new releases, and I'll tell you about the streams happening over on twitch.tv/ShaunosaurusRex. Our first game on this week's show is the super colorful StarCrossed, which is the story of 5 magical girls and their journey to recover a very important item that, if it falls into the wrong hands, would be disastrous and would cause an earthquake that would destroy the universe. Those are pretty high stakes. This isn't a game that I would usually be interested in because I'm not the biggest fan of like arcade shoot 'em up kind of bullet hell shooters. They are a type of game that clicks in my brain in a very irritating way where it's like there's a lot of stuff on screen and I have to process too much of it, and I'm not super great at being reflexive and like making the correct button presses, but I'm really glad I gave this a shot. I know someone who is in this game, Simply Andrea. She plays the princess, and she's a big reason as to why I stream and create content, and obviously I want to support her in her endeavors because she's awesome. And I'm really glad that I gave this game a shot. What shined brightest for me was the story, the characters, and the aesthetic. It is a beautifully colorful and positive game that is just a joy to look at because all the characters are super cute and it's colorful and it's just easy on the eyes. It's a very aesthetically pleasing game. The story is super simple, but that's what I like so much about it. You are a combination of 2 of 5 magical girls, and you're trying to recover this artifact. That's super simple, easy to follow. I don't have to really worry about it. I know what my end goal is. But what it does, and I talk about this a lot on the show, is that allows for good banter and character interaction / development, and this game has that in spades. I paired up the princess, who was voiced by Simply Andrea, and the outlaw. This was a tremendously smart decision on my part because of the way they interact. I love the way they bounce back and forth between each other. Turns out they've had a bit of a run-in in the past because the princess is, well, a princess, and the outlaw, well, is an outlaw and breaks laws. And I just love the way that they banter back and forth. The outlaw is kind of blunt and a little direct, and the princess is a little bit more diplomatic and seems to be a little more easier going and has, like, the frustrations with her position, but she still loves what she does. She has to be like being a princess for her is a full time and full life job, and she doesn't get to experience a lot of things that the other characters get to. It's just super interesting watching these two characters bounce off of each other, and I really enjoyed it. Once you pick your 2 characters, you're off on your adventure. You start at like a concert, and then you work towards your main destination, which is the big evil baddie at the end, trying to retrieve this very important lost item. And this is where the gameplay kicks in. It's pretty simple. It controls like a twin-stick shooter. Ideally, I think you would play this game in co-op, but I was playing just by myself. The trick is that your characters don't actually shoot anything. Instead, you just have a little star between the two of you that you need to bounce back and forth. If you can push L and R in a good rhythm, you can build up your multiplier, which makes you more powerful, and you can tear through enemies easier. It's a simple to learn, hard to master sort of control style, and it was what I struggled the most with. Is I felt like I would go in alternations of like really solid runs and then dying like 10 to 15 times in the same kind of area because I just was out of rhythm. If you are playing this game by yourself though, you control both characters at the same time. So you have the left side of your controller that controls the first player character, and then you have the right side of the controller that controls the second player character. After a little bit of brain breaking, I started to get the hang of it a little bit, but I definitely noticed that I kept them on the left and right sides of each other. So I had the princess as the first player, and I had the outlaw as the second player. The princess was always on the left because when they crossed over, I got all kinds of confused and it gave me headaches, and I would usually die at that point. So sometimes I would get into a super good flow and I'd just burn through stuff really, really quickly. That was until I met the scientist boss. There were a couple of trip up points earlier in the game where it took me a couple tries to get through it, but the scientist boss specifically really gave me fits and really gave me trouble because I just had a really hard time getting into that rhythm. The scientist boss has 3 separate phases, but there's a second phase where he brings in like 2 robo hands. Basically, he's in like a little like spaceship that doesn't have anything else. It's just him, and he fires out like missiles and these little blue tire looking things that like are indestructible apparently, and they're just a nuisance and they drove me nuts. But the second phase brings out hands, and these were just so hard to predict. Fortunately, though, the game does give you the ability to, as you destroy enemies, it gives you the ability to use an ultimate once you hit 100%. And once you get it to 100%, each princess has a different style of ultimate ability that makes you invulnerable and does all kinds of damage, and it's super helpful. I got to the point where I felt like I had to use the ultimate in order to get through the second phase of this boss battle, which left me a little bit vulnerable at the end where things really start ratcheting up, and there's missiles and like laser beams that you can't hit, and it just kind of wore me down a little bit. Each princess can only take 3 hits. They are pretty generous with hearts, but it did lead to a lot of deaths very late in that battle. And this is where I would implement my one like critique of the game, is I wish that the stuff was more patterned, because even after I was able to beat that boss, I had to face another section that has just an assortment of enemies that you fight in between the boss battles. Like it basically you have like traveling sections to like a boss battle, to traveling sections to a boss battle, that sort of rhythm and flow to this game. And after that boss, I really struggled because it's just so randomized, and I never felt like I was all that great at the game in the first place, because I don't play these games a ton. I don't know how easy or difficult this game would be compared to others in its genre, but it definitely felt extra difficult to me because I just don't have a base level understanding or knowledge or skill in these types of games. I'm just not very familiar with them, which is totally fine. For the most part, though, I felt like it was mostly my fault that I wasn't doing very well. I recognized when I was out of rhythm. I understood when I was not doing the correct thing, or I put a princess in a bad position. I think a little bit of additional patterning could have helped me to do a little bit better at the game, but maybe that's not for everyone. It's just a very, like, that's a personal thing where I was thinking about it the next day, and I was like, if there was just more of a set pattern to it where I understood where I was faltering at, or if I could maybe not have to feel like I need to use my ultimate ability during this specific phase during the boss fight, that would be helpful. But that's the thing, is I was thinking about it the next day, and I thought about it the day after, just tinkering around with it in my head, going, okay, if I can get my ultimate ability, maybe I need to use that more frequently. Maybe I'm not doing a good enough job trying to get into a rhythm early. Maybe I'm keeping them too far apart. Maybe they're too close together. How do I try and maneuver around creatures that are a little bit too close to the wall? Do I just let them go? That sort of thing was like spinning around in my brain, and that I think is the staying power of this game. Aside from the aesthetic choices, aside from the characters, and aside from the simple story that allows the characters to flourish and have their own personalities, that's what was working for me. Looking at it and going, okay, I need to learn how to implement the dash ability, because I forgot that that was a thing that you could even do. Someone had to point it out in the Twitch chat and was like, hey, you know, if you hit the bumper button, you can dash through certain enemy attacks, and that can get you hit less, which would, you know, obviously not have you die quite as frequently. So it's a game that I enjoyed. I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad I tried it. I hope that I have conveyed how much I did like this game. I did hit a couple of stumbling blocks here or there, and my major critique would be that some of the stuff was a little bit more patterned, but that is a very specific thing for myself because I'm just not familiar enough with these types of games. I don't know. It's a game that I think is worth your time. It's only $10. It has a really great aesthetic. It has great characters. I like the interactions and the dialogue. It was an experience that I enjoyed, even though I became frustrated. It's still stuck in my head, and I kind of tinkered with it and tried to figure out how to best overcome that situation, even though I didn't finish it. And part of the reason that I didn't finish StarCrossed was because I became so wrapped up in the story of Arcade Spirits. Arcade Spirits is another brightly colored, aesthetically pleasing game, but this one is a visual novel that just tells you the story of a character that you create. I obviously was a pop superstar who will remain nameless, that after losing your job as a lifeguard at the pool, you have to find a new place of work. Your best friend slash roommate Juniper gives you this app that helps you find your quote dream job, and it leads you to work at the Funplex arcade. This game is set in the year 20XX. They don't give you a specific year, and it takes an alternate history route where the video game crash of 1982, I believe, never happened. They very clearly like talk about going like, back in 1980 blah blah, there was going to be this game that was based on an alien who wanted a phone home, but because it was so bad, instead of releasing it, which they did in real life, they postponed it and the whole thing was avoided. So the video games never had that setback. So they've been on kind of an upward trajectory for the last 30 to 40 years in this game's timeline. So it has a lot of the stuff that you would see now, as far as like very popular esports stars and celebrities playing video games, and it's all like a very normalized thing. But arcades never died. So you work at this arcade place called Funplex that's kind of just treading water, like just hoping that it can hang out long enough to keep people employed. And that's the main crux of the game. You are a brand new employee here. You meet a cast of interesting and varied characters. You have Gavin, who is a very like methodical kind of numbers sort of guy. You have Ashley, who is an eccentric cosplayer. You have Queen Bee, who is an esports personality, and you have Naomi, who is living her dream working on retro games. And that's what is interesting to me about this game, is not only are all the conversations fun and I like the way the character dynamics play, but at the same time it's balancing the idea of what is your dream, what do you want from life, how do you attain dreams while still being like kind of more in the Gavin space where it's like, I need to make money to live. I can't just live on a dream. It asks those questions and kind of talks about them. It just follows your adventures with the Funplex arcade, and I really like it. You have the option to romance characters, talk to them, get to know them, understand their quirks, their idiosyncrasies. You get to learn about them, and I really like doing that. I like that it gives you several different options. You can like tell a joke, or you can be very like even-handed, or you can be very heartfelt, or just kind of a general statement to keep the conversation going. It's all very interesting, and I really like it. There's not a ton of gameplay to it because it's just a visual novel. I was reading it aloud to the Twitch chat, and the first chapter took about 2 hours and 40 minutes. The second and third chapters in one stream took about 3 hours and 10 minutes. So it looks like the chapters are getting shorter as the game goes along. It's super interesting. It has like very obvious references to the video game industry. Like there's a Max West or Max East or whatever it is, and it's like obviously this is PAX. It touches on a lot of the retro stuff and interesting things like that. It's a game that really clicked with me. I like it because it is interesting aesthetically. I like it because I am engaged with the story. I'm not typically a visual novel player, but I like having it set in an arcade, like, spoke to me, and it's something that, like, I'm glad that I tried. That's the theme of this week's show, is I tried things that I don't usually play, and both of them were great experiences. It's a very positive, funny, interesting, well-written game that I'm having a really good time with. I got very wrapped up in it, so much so that I forgot that I was going to play a different game on Sunday. I just was like, I want to play more Arcade Spirits, and I played through chapters 2 and 3, and I'm really excited to see where the game goes from here, because you start as a character who is kind of like, I don't know about this new job that I have, but through, and maybe it's partially because of the dialogue options that I've chosen, but through the course of the first 3 chapters, your character really starts to love their job and put themselves fully into it. And so I'm at a point right now where there's like a big event that's going to happen, and I'm really curious and anxious to see how that ends for my character and everyone around them. It's really neat. I really am enjoying the game, and I just want to know how it continues. So, yeah, I think Arcade Spirits is well worth checking out if you like visual novels. If you don't like visual novels, I don't know that this is going to do anything to pull you over to that side, but if the concept sounds interesting, playing as a character working in an arcade that is very, like, nostalgic. I never went to, like, big fancy arcades. We had just kind of some not super fancy stuff, but it did remind me of like going to a place called Kids Play that is no longer in existence, or going down to Riverfront Park and partaking in the arcade games down there when I was a kid, and it was kind of like a nice, like, feel good sort of thing. And that's kind of the case with both games, as both of them were just very brightly colored, fun, escapist fun. I know that's using fun back to back in descriptive words, but that's what it is, and that's what I liked about it, and it was very, very cathartic and nice, and I just really enjoyed both of these games. Finally, on this week's show, we'll look forward to this week's new releases. There's nothing in theaters, but there is a movie that I wanted to point out that'll be available on digital services. It is called How to Build a Girl, and it stars Bethany Feldstein, who was in Booksmart, and I'm very excited about that because obviously I love Booksmart very, very much, and I'll watch whatever she is in. So hopefully, if all goes according to plan, there will be a review of that on next week's show. There's nothing really on Blu-ray. John Wick Hex is on PlayStation 4, but aside from that, there wasn't anything terribly exciting. It was kind of just a mess of a lot of smaller stuff that nothing really spoke out to me for, which is fine because I still have games that I need to catch up on / finish, which leads me into this week's streams. Because I got so invested in Arcade Spirits, I forgot that I was going to play Telling Lies. So there's going to be a special extra stream on Tuesday that is going to be a playthrough of Telling Lies. On Wednesday, I'm going to continue Arcade Spirits, probably do another 2 chapters of that, or 2 levels of that, rather. Thursday will be baseball. We have 2 starts that we need to do with Uncle Rico, and then we'll do a couple games of Mariners franchise. Friday is FMV Friday with The Infectious Mind of Dr. Decker, and depending on how long that takes, because that seems to be the longest of these FMV games, at closer to 3 hours, we might do a game of baseball, but there might not be baseball on that day. Saturday is going to be kind of a longer smorgasbord stream. I'm going to do a couple parts of Saturday morning cartoons with Wallace and Gromit and Project Zoo. We'll follow that up with another couple levels in Arcade Spirits, and then we'll probably wrap up with a game or 2 of baseball. And then because it is Mother's Day, there will be no stream on Sunday. So there you go. Oh, and Monday. I always forget to talk about Monday. We're continuing Paper Mario. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Week in Review. If you like the content, you can scroll on down and you can hit the subscribe button, and then you can ring the bell and you'll be notified when I put up new videos. If you like the content enough and you want to let me know what you think, you can scroll on down and you can leave me a comment below talking about StarCrossed or Arcade Spirits, and let me know what you think of those games. If you agree or disagree with the thoughts that I shared with you during this show, be sure to head on over to twitch.tv/ShaunosaurusRex for streams on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Monday, and be sure to check back every Tuesday for more Week in Review right here. We'll see you next week.